Hey guys, good morning. Um, we're gonna do this in a take two. I've been sitting here talking to you for about 15 minutes and realized that I wasn't actually filming anything. So we're gonna do this again. Good morning. Today is March 20th. And if you're new here, I'm Kiera. Feel free to call me Q. Welcome to my garden. One of the things that I've been doing for the last couple days is I've been starting the process of hardening off my plants. And I realized today that I should probably make a video about this because when I was just starting with gardening, I'm still fairly new. I've been gardening for about 3 years now, technically four, but really three. But when I first started gardening, I heard people talk about like, oh, make sure you harden off your plants. Oh, yeah. And obviously I hardened them off and stuff like that, but I didn't know what that was. And so I figured I'd sit down and do a video and just kind of share with you what that is, why it's important, and then also talk about just the different ways that you can go about it. Because from what I saw, and this was also very confusing and frustrating for me when I first started gardening, was everybody does it a little bit differently, and everybody kind of has their own take on, oh, you have to do it this way. And I wanted to do it right. And so that was kind of frustrating for me because I didn't know who to listen to. But what I found is they're all right. And so I wanted to also just put this out there to kind of reassure you that there's lots of different ways that you can do this and explain the basic concept of it so that you can go about doing it in a way that works for you. Because even with all of the years that I've started seeds, even my first year where it didn't go very well, but I managed to plant some stuff from seeds. But every single year I've done it a little different. And so I just wanted to also just share that so that you can be reassured. It's not like if you don't do this one way, all your plants are going to die. It's not like that. But this is something that will really make sure that your garden is successful. And you don't want to skip this because if you skip it entirely, your plants could all die. And if you've put this much work into starting things from seeds and you've been working on it for months and babying them in your house or in your greenhouse or what have you, you definitely don't want to just get overexcited, put them in the garden with no kind of prep work and no hardening off, because that is where your plants can die, or they can really get stunted and suffer, and then you just don't get the garden that you wanted to after you put in all that work. And it's something that, like, it's really easy to just not know to do it, but it's something that in just a week, a couple weeks, it can really give you a lot of success in your garden. So anyway, that's my spiel about it. But let me explain what hardening off is. So basically what hardening off is it is acclimating any kind of seedlings that you grew inside or under any kind of cover, whether it be inside your house, underneath grow lights, on a windowsill, or even in a greenhouse. All of those, you're gonna wanna acclimate them to the sun slowly before you just like put them in your garden and it's kind of like, good luck everybody, hope you make it, right? So you don't need to turn your garden into a Hunger Games kind of scenario. And so what you want to do is harden them off. And I'm going to go over, different ways to do it and all that stuff. But basically what it is you take all of your seedlings outside for longer and longer increments during the day so that they can get used to the sun, because the sun is so much stronger, so much more powerful than the lights in your house, on your grow lights, or like even if you're growing everything in a greenhouse and you think, well, the whole thing is glass, including the roof of it, or it's like plexiglass or something like that. Even that, it filters the sunlight. And so they are getting light, but it's not as strong as if the sun is just like beaming down right on them. And so you want to kind of give them a couple days to kind of get used to it. Because basically what happens if you don't is, imagine if you're inside all winter and then all of a sudden it's this super bright sunny day and you spend the whole day outside. You don't have any kind of like protection from it, your skin isn't used to it, and you get a massive sunburn, right? That's basically what happens to your plants, is they get sunburned. And the thing is it could be a little bit of damage, and they could recover from it. I've had plants that I've burned and they recovered from it. It could be that they get stunted, which sucks because it just slows down the growth of the plant, or it just never produces the way that you would want it to. Or the other thing that can happen is, like I said, they could just die completely and never recover. Hardening off can avoid all of those scenarios. How to go about this? Um, like I said, I've heard and seen and researched this a lot because in the beginning I wanted to find the right way to do it. And that's kind of my personality, is if I don't know what I'm doing, I want to do it the right way, and I do a lot of research, and I overwhelm myself with it, but it can lead to a lot of like paralysis, and I don't want this to be the reason why you like don't start your garden or don't grow things from seeds, right? Because this is totally something that you can do. Now I will say, if you buy seed starts from the nursery, or like a big box store that's near you or anything like that, you don't have to do this process. They've already done it for you. So if you get something from a nursery, even if, you know, they have it sometimes under shade cloth and stuff like that while you're browsing, you don't have to do this step. They've already done it. And so that kind of stuff you can put directly out in your garden. But if this is just if you're growing stuff from seeds at home yourself. There's a few main things that you're trying to do with hardening off. You are definitely and mostly getting your seedlings acclimated to the sun. You're also getting them acclimated to the temperatures, and even at night. And then you're also getting them acclimated to the wind or the breeze and stuff like that. On some people's seed starting setups, you might see that they have a fan in their house, right? And it just kind of blows on the seedlings. And what it does is as they grow and the plants are moving, you know, it just makes the stalks like a little bit stronger over time. And so that gives you like healthier, stronger plants by the time they actually go outside. Now, I don't actually have a fan in my house on either of my seed starting setups, the one that I have in the garage or the smaller one that I have my peppers on in the house. I don't have fans yet. And so for me, part of the hardening off process is sometimes I will leave them outside completely covered, not on getting any kind of sunlight, just so that they can kind of get used to the breeze a little bit. And I'll do that for a couple days. And that is something that I might not have to do, but it's something that I do just especially, you know, lately where we had the correct temperatures for hardening off, but it was raining. Like for the past week, it's for multiple weeks, but last week it was raining most of the week. And I still wanted to start the hardening off process. And so at the very least, I could get them outside used to the temperatures and used to the kind of like the breeze blowing through. Now, we also had like really high winds, and so I definitely didn't have them outside during that because there's no need, and I don't need to come out here to have all of my seed starts just toppled over because it's pretty crazy. But just like the breeze here, you can see some of this stuff as I'm talking is just moving on its own. That's really helpful too for your plants. All of that is kind of making them stronger and just getting them, basically it's just getting them used to being outside. So now that you know why to harden off your plants and why it's important, the next step or the next thing that I want to go over is just kind of like different ways that you can go about it. So I've heard some people talk about hardening off their plants over a week's time. I've heard people talk about doing it over a couple weeks. I've done both. I've also heard people talk about how they start in the morning to give their plants the kind of like the less intense morning sun. I've also heard people talk about how they start in the evening, so that if they forget about them, they aren't getting more sun than they need to. And then if they start in the evening, say they do it for half an hour or an hour, they kind of work back the time from there. But either way, what you're doing is you're basically leaving your plants out for longer and longer periods of time. Like I said, I've heard people talk about the time increments different ways too. So some people go in time increments of 30 minutes. Some people do an hour, some people do 2 hours. So really it just depends on you and what you want to do and what you're comfortable with. Also, look at your plants, and if you notice that, oh, I left them out there for, you know, let's say 2 hours, and I noticed that a lot of them looked a little sunburnt, then maybe dial that back or just leave them out there for 2 hours again the next day instead of going to 4, right? So it's really up to you. You can play with it. Again, like these are all just ideas. I don't want you to get caught up like I did on thinking there's one way to do it, because it's not. All of them are correct, and all of them work in different climates. You just have to figure out what works for you. The other thing is you have to figure out what works for you in your time. If you're really busy and you don't have time to do this for 30-minute increments over, 2-3 weeks, then that's okay, right? Do the best you can, because anything you do is going to be better for your plants and it's going to make them stronger. I've also done this in different increments, and what I found and what I'm doing this year is I'm doing hour increments. And so the first time I left all of these out, I left them out for an hour. I also left them out where, they were getting morning sun that was a little bit lighter, and it wasn't like the heat of the day blinding death sunshine. Like, I didn't do that, right? And another thing I do is I actually put a timer on my phone, because otherwise I forget about them, and it is very easy. I've done this. It's very easy to just leave them outside for way longer. You think like, oh yeah, I'll come back and get them in an hour. You might not. It might be 4 hours later that you're just like, oh crap, I left all of those outside. And I've done that too, and stuff still survived, right? I had some damage for sure when I've done that before, but stuff still survived, so it's okay. Anyway, so what I'm doing right now is I'm doing starting in the morning, and I'm doing hour increments. So every single day I leave it out for an hour longer. Now, the other really important thing that I'm doing this year is I'm paying attention to ideal temperatures. So that's something I didn't really do before. I was just going off of like, okay, last frost date, when can I put things outside? When are they big enough? Okay, let me go put them outside. And this year I've been trying to pay more attention to seed packets when they say, transplant outside when the air temperature is this, or ideal temperature is this. I've actually been looking at the seed packets this year and trying to go for temperature. And I think that this is a system that really works for me, and I really like it. It means I don't put things out as soon as I wake up. It's a couple hours later. Right now, it's about 9 o'clock that I'm putting these out. And then my peppers will be later in the day, right? Or some days my peppers don't go out at all because we still are getting a lot of rain and stuff like that, or it's overcast, and so it just doesn't warm up enough for them. And so for me, it's better than to put them outside below their ideal temperature. I just leave them in the house because they're fine in there. So that's not necessarily something you have to do. That's something I'm experimenting with this year, but I wanted to share it because I do like it. Now, with that said, you will notice that there's all sorts of stuff, all sorts of different stuff growing in the 4 trays in front of me. Here, I can move these over so you can see. I have flowers, I have herbs, I have tomatoes, I just spilled water on my leg. I have all sorts of stuff in these 4 trays. And so I'm not going and putting all of these out based on the different temperatures and all of that kind of stuff, because I'm not gonna do that. You can if you want to. I'm not doing it. Laziness is strong in this one. And so what I'm doing is I'm saying, okay, well, out of all this stuff, what's the most important to me? And tomatoes, for my spring and summer garden, out of this, it's tomatoes. And also I'm thinking, okay, out of this set, what is the stuff that needs the highest temperature as an ideal temperature? And for all of these things, that also happens to be the tomatoes. I basically have grouped all my seedlings into tomatoes and peppers. Pepper category is literally just peppers. Everything else goes in the tomato category. And that just makes it easier for me. Again, that's how I'm doing it. I'm not saying this is the right way to do it. It's how I'm doing it this year. And I like it so far. We'll see how it goes. When I look at the back of a packet, this one says transplant when air temperature is 45 degrees or warmer. And so what I do is I wait until it's 50 degrees outside, and then I put all these trays out. Now for my peppers, those are a little bit different because their ideal temperature on the packet says 70 degrees. And so I've been going a little bit lower than that just because we're not getting 70-degree days yet at all. But I also want to still harden them off. And so what I'm doing is I'm putting them out in the afternoon in the hottest part of our day right now, which is probably about like 65 degrees, 66 degrees is the warmest we're getting so far. And it's going to warm up here pretty quick. But I'm putting my peppers out for like an hour at 65 degrees just to start the hardening off process. And I'll keep doing that, and I won't actually increase that time increment until it starts getting warmer. Now, on, like I said, on the days that it doesn't get to 65 degrees, say the warmest it gets is 50 degrees, I don't put my peppers out at all. That's just my preference, but it just, I wanted to share that so that you can see, you can play with this a lot, and there's a lot of wiggle room and there's a lot of liberty that you can have with this. I've also heard people start everything in the evening and then they leave it out at night. And for some people, what they do is they will start, you know, an hour before the sun goes down, and then they leave it out an hour after the sun goes down and bring it all in. And then the next day they'll do 2 hours before the sun goes down and then bring it in, like, you know, an hour or 2 hours before the sun goes, after the sun goes down, and then bring it in. And you, either way you do it, whether you're starting in the morning or the evening, you want to work your way up to leaving your plants outside all day. And then you also want to work up to leaving your plants outside all night. Now, the reason that I wait, and I actually do it starting in the morning for most things, is because by the time I get to the point where I'm leaving them out all day, usually the nighttime temperatures are solid, and so it's really easy to just leave them out there all night. I don't have to worry about them getting too cold. I don't have to worry about checking the nighttime temperatures. It's just good to go. So usually for stuff like this, again, I'll keep looking at the forecasts and stuff and the highs and lows, but for stuff like this, by the time I'm leaving this outside all day, the nighttime temperatures, I'll look and see like, okay, is this good? Yep. And I'll just leave it out all night. The other thing with leaving it out all night is if you live in an area that has, like, if you have stray cats that come into your yard, or squirrels, or I don't know, depending on what it is, birds. Right now we have a bunny issue. And so when I leave them outside, I leave them up on a table, not on the ground, because I don't want stuff to get on them. The other thing that really helps with is, you know, I'm not going to have to worry about slugs or anything coming in, any bugs or pests coming in and eating these, because they're high up off the ground. And it'd be different if I left them in my garden, say like sitting on the wood chips, right? Which I've done that before. And you might get, you know, early aphids, or you might get slugs eating certain things depending on what it is. Like if you had lettuce or something like that, like they will get in your trays if you leave them just sitting on the ground on the wood chips or something like that. So just be mindful of that as you're doing this. It's not a huge deal, but just be mindful of where you put it, and just make sure that, you know, they're safe, because again, you've put in all this work. It's devastating if you lose it all over something that happens like over one night or a couple nights or something like that. So for me and my process and how I harden off plants, doing, you know, and added an hour every day, usually it takes me about a week to a week and a half to finish the whole process. And what I will do too sometimes is I will leave them in their trays and leave them outside all day and all night before actually putting them in my garden for like a day or two, just to make sure that everything is okay. Another reason I've done that in the past is, you know, if the garden for whatever reason wasn't ready, or if I didn't have the time yet. So if it was, well, if it's raining, I keep them under cover. If it's a light rain, I'll leave them outside where not covered. But like, let's say right now we're working on our bed still. So these will probably be done hardening off before all of our beds are actually finished being filled and prepped. And so what I'll do is I'll just leave them on a table, and they'll still be, you know, underneath all the elements. They'll be exposed to all the elements. They just won't be in the garden yet. And there's nothing wrong with that, right? You just want to make sure that nothing's eating them. You want to make sure that they have the proper, you know, fertilization if you need to do that, if they're getting too big for their pots. Now, I've had to do that. Like last year, I had to leave everything in its pot for an extra, I want to say 2 or 3 months, because we were moving. We were buying a new house. We were buying this house and moving, and everything was yellow and dead and dying. It wasn't dead, it was dying. It's just not ideal. And so that wasn't great, but we still planted everything. It wasn't the best garden. It was kind of our throwaway garden last year, but we still got some food off of it, right? And so you definitely don't want to leave them out for that long. At that point, it really was, all the plants were suffering, but it is still possible. The point is like you don't have to just like throw them all away, right? And that's one of the things I love so much about gardening is, yeah, there's best practices and there's always more you can do to improve and get a better harvest and get like healthier plants and all, and just like have more beauty and all that stuff. I love that there's always kind of a continuation of the project, but at the same time there's so much grace for you to mess up, or for, you know, the weather to just be different than you thought and all of that kind of stuff, for you to get busy, and you know, maybe it's a couple weeks until you can transplant stuff out because you have, you know, life happening or you're traveling or whatever, right? I love that there's still some wiggle room and there's some grace and space in all of this. So that is my process for how I harden off my plants. I hope this was helpful for you. I think the biggest takeaway that I would love for you to get from this is, one, it's worth doing. It's good for your plants. It makes, you know, it's kind of like the finishing touch on all of the work you've done for planting things from seeds, starting things from seeds. And at the same time, don't feel like there's one right way to do this, or you will end up with nothing and it's all wrong, right? Just kind of think of it as like every person that you hear from is right. And so then the beautiful thing about that is you get to choose and play with it and figure out what works for you, right? You might decide, like I usually do, I don't want to be putting things in and out all day at different times and all that kind of stuff. This year is a little bit different because our weather is a little bit different this year. But for the most part, I put all my trays outside at the same time every day, and I bring them all in at the same time every day, right? I don't have staggers and stuff like that. And that really works well for me for most years. It works well for me to just have a timer on, and sometimes like I will also make it so that by the time I'm leaving stuff out longer in the day, it's the weekend. So like things like that, you can even start it on a weekend if that's what works for you. So more than anything, you just make it easier on yourself. So now that you know what hardening off is, the only real question is, okay, should I do it, yes or no? Just choose yes. Make it easier on yourself, right? And you know, so you'll feel more successful in your garden. And then past that, it's just exploring what works for you. So I hope this was helpful. If you have hardened off your plants before and you have any other tips that work well for you that you want to share with someone, I'd love for you to put those in the comments, because like I've been saying this whole video, everybody does it differently. And so if you have something that really works for you, put in the comments. Also share what zone you're in so that people can kind of like see, okay, well, I'm in zone 9, like I'm in zone 9 here. And so if I'm in zone 9, maybe I could start around the same time or same temperatures and stuff like that. So if you have any tips, I'd love for you to just share them in the comments so that other people can see those too. And thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye.